see a bunch of people join. So thank you for waiting for us for the technical difficulties. You guys are the best. Awesome. Well, I think kind of the way that would make sense to do this is, you know, Jesse and I talked about potentially maybe talking a little bit about what's going on over at the winery, and then going through, I think maybe we have 4 wines we're going to do today, going through the first 2, then taking some questions, and then maybe going to the last 2, if that works for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, man.
Nice, man. So explain to me what it's been like over there. Because what's funny, I tell people is like, oh, you know, everything's shut down, but the grapes, you know, keep growing, and the wine, you know, the winery still has to function.
Yeah, we're still drinking wine. The vineyard hasn't stopped at all. As you can see, it's just nothing but rain here in the Willamette Valley. And I'm actually giving you a shout from the Dundee Hills. This is one of our 3 Dundee Hills estate properties. This is my home vineyard called Redside. So we're just chilling here at 350 foot elevation, looking at Mount Hood a little bit over to the east, the Coast Range behind me. And then this is a 11 acre parcel of Pinot Noir that we planted in 2007. This is Pommard block. And yeah, you can see the vines don't stop growing. So I took a little cuttings. Hopefully the vineyard will forgive me to take two clusters. So this is early season fruit thinning right now, and 2 clusters of Pinot Noir off the Pommard block. So
nice.
Yeah.
So I see, what do I see? Bud break?
Oh yeah, this is well beyond bud break. So this is this is a little pre-emergent cluster here, pre-formed cluster. So we're pre-bloom now. So we are not too far away from flowering, which is kind of a big step and kind of benchmark in the cycle of the growing season here in the vineyard. And we've been really busy. We move wires today. That's a John Deere tractor. Is not a real tractor out there, but don't tell my 3.5-year-old daughter that. She thinks that John Deere is real. She found second gear the other day, so that was a little scary. Yeah. So we haven't been just watching the vines grow. It's been pretty busy for all the growth out here. And yeah, we're probably about 10 days away from bloom and flowering, and then we'll have set, and then we'll know kind of general crop load we have for the season. But yeah, the COVID program hasn't been, vines haven't noticed at all. So to some degree, that's been a real nice aspect.
Yeah. At least you guys, quote unquote, continue as business as normal. But obviously, having the tasting room closed and having, you know, all the facilities closed, and then obviously your accounts, your what we call on-premise accounts, restaurants and bars, taking a beating.
Man, I grew up in this industry. You know, the winery's 33 years old, and I've been in this industry since I was like 8 or 7 years old. And you know, any business in hospitality, this kind of ordeal is really problematic. But nobody feels it more acutely than our friends in the restaurant and on-premise industry, like you just said. And I have dear friends that own restaurants all across the country and run restaurants, people that work in restaurants. It's really brutal for them. So try to count our blessings every hour, every day, and be close to your family and friends. Drink some really nice wine every night. Make sure that's a key component, and then just keep motoring. So that's what we're doing.
Nice. Yeah, and we've talked about this a little bit, that the beautiful silver lining is that we all get a little more time. A lot of us get more time to cook dinner and have a little more wine in the evening. I know my wife and I, when she gets home, we quickly work out, we quickly make dinner, and we got to go to bed. So there's been a little bit of extra time to do all the things that we enjoy, which has been nice.
Yeah, no doubt. And we all, if we're lucky enough to be on a Facebook stream and chat and drink wine together, I think we have a lot of blessings. We just have to pay attention to those and keep our microscope on the blessings rather than the challenges.
Very good. Well, I think we should get into tasting. I just want to say I see a lot of people. I see Lisa, I see Sally, I see Ken, I see Joffrey, Catherine, Scott, I see Rodney, Amy. So thank you all for joining. We're going to do questions at the halfway point. So we're going to do 2 wines, and then we'll take some questions. So let's start with the first wine. So this is the 2018 Three Hills Cuvee Ylang. I have the bottle here. Chardonnay, if you can see it. And my thing, I'm so excited for you to tell me about this. So we did the your white wine Pinot Gris in the episode. So my people have not seen this wine yet, have not heard about this wine. And I'll let you talk first, and then I'll kind of tell you why I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, stylistically, I mean, it's one of the 3 core varietals we started with in 1987. We made it every year since. I think the last 15 years have just been just incredibly exciting for Chardonnay in the Willamette Valley. We have all these Dijon clones here that were planted in the early 90s that have had some vine age. I think we've really honed our game in terms of yeast selection and fermentation vessels, be them, French oak, be them concrete, be them stainless steel, keep them all separate. And the kind of wines that we're crafting these days are just incredibly evocative, very complex. And I think it's safe to say now that, Willamette Valley is making some of the best Chardonnay in all of the globe. And that's really cool. And, sometimes a joke could say we're kind of an overnight 33-year-old overnight success for Chardonnay. And it's just the momentum for this varietal in the Willamette Valley is outpacing anything. Maybe neck and neck with Pinot Noir, which is, I never thought I'd say that, but very happy to report.
Yeah, and so you just hit the nail on the head of why I'm so excited about it. Because the best wines, I think, that are coming out of the most exciting and the things that I taste, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this drinks way above its value, way above its price point, is the Chardonnay. It's so world class, and I used to compare. I love Santa Barbara Chardonnay, but Oregon style is even a little different than that. It's even a little more, I think, poppy, and I think just like the Pinot Noir, if you compare kind of the Pinots in California to Oregon, I think you get a little more of that earth mineral character, and I'm really, really blown away by the Chards I've tried out of Oregon right now.
Well, you just talked me into pouring another glass, Vince. So thank you. Yeah, I think. It's been really exciting. Like that sort of tension and vibrancy in the wine. I actually spent a couple formative years working under Bruce McGuire and Greg Brewer down there at Santa Barbara Winery, and made a lot of that style, kind of that traditional Pacific Coast style, where a fair bit of malo, if not 100%, a fair bit of oak, relatively higher pH Chardonnays than we're crafting here. And that style was pretty rich and pretty buttery. This style kind of has a new world profile on the fruit and the vibrancy, but in kind of an old world style on the minerality. So, what you alluded to just a second ago, and the wines have that great freshness, that pop of both tropical fruit and then kind of that zesty citrus fruit in there, lemon lime zest, and then that rich and lengthy acid profile, which for me, really Chardonnay doesn't have a lot in the way of tannin. So the structure is the acid profile. And it is probably my favorite aspect of drinking the varietal Chardonnay, is just that vibrancy and that acid profile and that je ne sais quoi that even with really high acid Chardonnays that are kind of tightly wound and that beautiful core minerality, they still provide a lot of richness and almost that salivating effect on the palate where you kind of reach back for another glass, another sip.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm an acid freak. So like that's super important to me, is really having that kind of resonant feature going all the way through the wine so that it's easier to pair. But what's cool about this Chardonnay and Oregon Chardonnay is you don't struggle as much, I think, with ripeness. So a lot of the old world places, they have that acidity, but getting it ripe can be a challenge. Whereas this, like you said, you get those tropical notes, which is really, really cool, while still being nice and fresh. Sometimes when it gets to the tropical land of, flavors, you start to lose acidity, and I don't get that at all with this.
Yeah, we didn't add acid either. So this is 100% natural acidity. So that, grapes have, I think, 16, 17 different trace acids in them. So having that balance is part and parcel to having a natural developing, grape that's grown in the right place. So yeah, for us, like we typically pick Chardonnay right at 21.5 brix to maybe 22.3. So the sugar levels are fairly restrained. And in a vintage like this, like 2018, it was really easy to get wines that were over the top. So we kind of picked fast and furiously to retain that vibrancy. That was a key component in our picking decisions back in the fall of 2018.
Very good. And for people who are this is a new thing, when you say something is a Dijon clone, explain what you mean for people.
Yeah, so not to make the viticulture more complex than it already is, but grapevines tend to be pretty, they're apt to mutate in the vineyard. So on a DNA level, they tend to have a lot of variability. And if you're able to capture or at least identify and understand that there's a different type of cluster or shoot in your vineyard, and you can propagate that, you might actually have a different mutation or clone of varietal, which could be a totally new thing. So there's all these different hosts of clones within Pinot Noir, within Cabernet Sauvignon, within Chardonnay, and having that varietal mix-up is really important for different flavor complexities, different ripeness trajectories, acid, fruit profile. I look for different clones for different fruit profiles. So for me, it really sets the tone on kind of giving you a big bevy of options. And I think potentially it allows for your wines to be more complex.
Beautiful. Yeah. Let's kind of detail this one a little bit now that we have it. Cheers.
Yeah. Saludos.
Mm. Yeah.
I hope
I get
everybody's
almost
drinking at home with it.
Yeah, I hope you're drinking. Yeah, exactly. I hope you're drinking something. It's 5 o'clock our time, and it's 8:30 on the East Coast. So if you haven't started on the East Coast, you're way behind. Yeah. So obviously, the initial thought is actually the minerality for me, which is normally something I say from Old World wines, but I really get this beautiful kind of flinty character, which is really nice. And then I do get almost like an orange zest, like a really ripe citrus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something we look to contain and kind of showcase in the wine. So, you know, when we bottle wine like this, I think people think like, oh, it's just one wine that made this wine, but that's not true for this wine or any other of our other bottlings. You know, this wine is I mean, we're still a small winery, but this is an amalgamation of about 25 different wines that were all picked separately, vinified separately, fermented separately, aged separately, and then and only then at the end where we understood every component did we blend this wine. And the Three Hills Cuvee is a blend of our three oldest sites, so Freedom Hill, Lang Estate Dundee Hills, and then Durant Vineyards Dundee Hills. So it's all Dijon clone from 3 different Dijon clones from those sites. We ferment them separately, and it's got all the components of 60-gallon barrels of French oak, 130-gallon barrels of French oak, concrete cubes and concrete eggs, and then different stainless steel lots. So we keep everything separate so we have a really good chance to understand it. And then as we build towards blending and bottling, do we actually craft the final iteration of the wine?
Yeah, and that was something I didn't understand until I hung around winemakers. It seems like a basic concept to winemakers, but I think some people think you just pick the grapes, ferment the fruit, bottle it up. They don't understand that what you do is you spread it out with all these different variations of how you treat the juice, and then eventually you can play with all these different blends so you can craft the perfect wine, which probably I think the benefit is obviously, you know, you get a lot of freedom and creative freedom to make the wine that you initially thought you were going to get, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you know, blocks will surprise you in really good ways. Blocks can, you know, kind of flummox you. You're like, I think we can do better on the farming here. And for us, we really try to create that, what I call a feedback loop between vineyard and wine, and block and wine. So we can actually be able to improve the whole process. So every block of wine, you come back to the winery events and we can barrel taste, you know, 400 different wines from the 2019 vintage and tell you the provenance of every single barrel: clone, rootstock, soil type, elevation, date of planting, fermentation kinetics, blah, blah, blah. So all those different things go into it. When you start to understand things, you can start to improve them on the farming side. So for us, that's kind of a critical aspect of chasing terroir. And that's what we do pretty much every day for the Pinot Noir, the Pinot Gris, and of course the Chardonnays.
Beautiful. All right, well, let's move on. Do you want to go to the reserve, right?
Yeah, let's do the reserve, definitely.
Cool.
I hate pouring
So the
wine.
Chardonnay, by the way, that's not something that we did on the show, but that's something that they can get through you guys, correct?
Yeah, then that 2018's got some great accolades. I don't think we have much left. I think we got like 25 cases. We actually bottled the 2019 Three Hills Cuvée Chardonnay on Tuesday. So I had a big week of bottling with my team, and everybody worked really hard and got there at 4:30 in the morning and busted out till 6. And we just captured 2019, which won't be released for a couple months. But we are in the tail end of the 2018 vintage, which is just singing right now.
Yeah, that was my next question, is what's going on at the winery. So you guys are bottling.
Yeah, we just wrapped up last evening, so that was good. It's kind of like that last marker for any given wine, and every bottling represents 2 years of work: a year in the growing season in the vineyard, and then a year in the cellar. So for us, it's exciting bottling, but it might even be more stressful than even harvest, because sometimes I feel less in control of all the different parts and having trucks show up and bottles and glass corks and samples and labels and blah, 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 blah. It's a big symphony, but when we get it done.
Yeah, so you're doing all the processes at the same time, basically.
Yeah, it's all got to work together. If one instrument's out of tune, then you can't move forward, which can be annoying. But we have such a great dedicated team, and they all get it done. So it's really nice. You want to
Very nice.
under the reserve?
Everybody, start asking if you have any questions about these wines or anything else. We'll take a break after this wine to answer them. So start kind of writing your questions. All right. So next we are doing the Pinot Noir Reserve, the 2017, and this is the wine that we talked about on the show.
Yeah. Yep.
Very good.
Yeah,
Did we do the 2017 on the show?
I think we did the 16, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I think this is different.
Yeah, the 16. This one has a little bit more red fruit. The 16 had a little bit more darker profile, a little bit more, probably a little bit more sauvage, like a more deeper, denser core. This wine has a lot of density, but it has a beautiful like potpourri bouquet. And I think it has a little bit more red fruit of a angle and plays a little bit more in that spectrum.
Yeah, so I remember my first note with when we tasted in the show was it was kind of a darker cherry cola kind of thing, whereas this is almost like a bubblegummy, like super like flamboyant, fun. This is cool.
Yeah, and for all the Pinot Noirs that we craft out there, we typically bottle and like maybe 12 to 15 bottlings of Pinot Noir every vintage, so it gets completely out of hand. But that's part of the fun of being a Pinot Noir producer is you get to work with all these different vineyard sites and clones and blocks and vineyards that really have their own kind of DNA and thumbprint, and being able to capture that's really cool. So, but the reserve is a little different in that it's 100% Pinot Noir, all our top vineyards, but it's kind of the funnest Pinot Noir we get to craft every year because I don't have any self-imposed rules about which barrels that my assistant winemaker Dan out there, my father Don Lange, Don and Wendy, my parents, and then myself. We get to select those barrels and then make the reserve cuvee. So it's a lot of fun because it's like the most ebullient and kind of like playful, outgoing wine in the aromatics. For me, it just smells great. And on the palate, it delivers that kind of spectrum of fruit from that red fruit we mentioned earlier, all the way to some black fruit components that come from more of our marine sedimentary soil. So it's a really fun wine to craft from all those different barrels, and clearly a pretty fun wine to drink.
Yeah, what's really cool about this is just what you said. You know, as opposed to getting some sort of single vineyard representation, this is kind of a real nice showcase of Lang, I think, because it's some of your top sites, and it's kind of your personal blend that's just something that is not necessarily terroir specific. It's what you want to do with the wine to represent Lang. Yeah,
and it's probably our most widely distributed wine, and has just a great following. This 2017 wine really, the vintage for Pinot Noir, I don't want to say surprised me, but evolved in a way that maybe I didn't expect in the cellar. By the time we got to September and October with the Pinot Noirs for bottling, I was just kind of blown away by the wines. I knew they were really good when we picked them, but I didn't really understand the profile. And 6, 7, 8 months later, when we started to get to blending, I was just like, wow, these wines are just stunning. So great vintage across the board, and I think has a lot of aging opportunity too when you get into like our single vineyard property wines and the Three Hills Cuvee.
Now you're kind of, what's your general recommendation for how long you like to put these down before you open them? And I know the winemaker answer, which is they're all good all the time, right? They're good whenever you want to open them. But if someone said, all right, I want to wait to the ideal time, what do you tell them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, which vintage is the current release? That's the winemaking joke. But yeah, it's I think like in general, I think the 3-year to like 8-year range is a great way to get into our wines because they still carry a lot of the primary fruit to even the 8-year mark easy, but they're starting to develop some of those secondary and tertiary notes that give the wine some more complexity. The acids start to round off a little bit. So I think texturally they can be even more approachable and appealing. So really it kind of depends on your food and your mood, really, and your personality when you want to drink them. But I think that 3 to 8 year window is a really good one. Although I can say, and you know, we've been around over 3 decades now, we can say with certainty that our wines age, you know, 20, 30 years, no problem. So,
Wow.
And that's not something that we have to just boast about. We can prove it because we have the cellar. My folks have always made great wines, but the wines from the early 90s and the late 80s that they crafted, we're still drinking today. So they have that potential if one is so inclined.
Very nice. Well, we're starting to get some questions. So one of the questions, I'll let you take it first, is What's the benefit of bottling in larger bottles, larger format bottles? You got one right behind you, I see.
Yeah, that one we consumed that 5-liter in the evening. I think that was from my wedding party. Maybe an hour. Yeah, the large format bottles, they tend to age a little longer. I really love magnums in 3 and 5 liter bottles. I just think they're really fun. So it's sort of a personal quest of mine to collect them. And it's hard to justify opening a 1.5 liter or 3 or 5 liter bottle by yourself. So for me, it sort of implies a party in a bottle. I can get through a 750 on my own pretty well, but I think like a Magnum or a 3 liter, you need some friends and family around, which, I really think wine's highest purpose is to bring people together. So I like that implication of the larger bottlings.
Cool. And I'll say usually from a Somm perspective, what they tend to have a less oxygen to juice ratio. And so what that means is that they're going to age slower. So if you want to, and more time aging without actually introducing more oxygen, just kind of further develops the wine without over oxygenizing. So what people will do with their bigger format bottles is those are the ones they'll lay down for a really long time.
Yeah. You can almost, I don't want to say double their ageability, but they definitely age slower than the 750s. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And somebody asked, how do I get a 5 liter? And I think somebody responded, exactly. Call you up. Most wineries in general, they have them, but they won't advertise them, or they'll be, member only, or because they just don't make a ton of those formats.
Yeah. It takes an extra day for us to bottle them. They're all hand dipped in wax and hand corked. I mean, we used to do the 750s by hand, so it's not a stretch, but the 5 liters are all hand corked, and then beautiful bright red wax cap. And yeah, they're beautiful presentations, and they're really fun to have.
Beautiful. Heather just said, I just opened an 02 Freedom Hill. Thoughts on 2002? We love it.
Yeah, the 2002 vintage, I got back from New Zealand studying viticulture and enology in 1999. And it's when I was really kind of thrusted into kind of a more proactive winemaking role, for sure, in 2002. I remember the vintage being very long, kind of an Indian summer vintage, very long fall, gorgeous autumn. And the wines, some of my favorite wines from the entire decade. They had great longevity, but very classical Oregon Pinot Noir profile. They were fully ripe wines, but they had great structure too. So they're wines that I think clearly have aged really well. And we've been drinking a lot of them here with my family and at home. And I really liked the vintage. It had a lot of press, so the wine sold really fast and had a big following. But I just think of a very classical Pinot Noir vintage from the Willamette Valley in 2002.
Nice. Someone's asking, is the Chardonnay available on the site? Do you know that off the top of your head?
On our website, it should be. Yeah, the 2018. I think we literally have like 20 cases left. So yeah, or something like that in the neighborhood of it. And it should be online.
Nice. Someone's asking about your barrel program. Tell a little bit more about your barrel.
Yeah, it depends on the varietal. But in general, I think our approach is something I take from my folks, and in that, barrels can be a way to, they're a pretty important input in the winemaking kind of algorithm, and they can be a dominant force too. So for us, really using French oak is a way to help frame a wine, but never to overtake a wine, which is why we keep them all separate. So I'll talk a little bit about that in regards to the 2016 estate, but for us, it's a way to kind of help round out the wine, maybe fill in some holes in the wine, if that makes sense, like on a textural tannin front profile. But all our barrels are 36-month air dried. So the industry standard's 24. So for us, that additional year of aging and air drying for the wood helps curate the wood in a way that I think is more approachable to Pinot Noir, which is all that we make really. And I think that approach allows us to use, for this reserve, it's 25% new French oak. Getting the Three Hills Cuvee, it's closer to 35. And the single vineyard wines may be just above that. But I reserve the right to kind of change that approach every year. And really, I take a lot of the cues from my folks on that front, and kind of letting the varietal and the Pinot Noir show through more than being dominated by the wood. I think that's an important part of our general winemaking philosophy. And I think you see that exhibited in all of our barrel-aged wines.
Very nice. So I have a couple of questions. Candy says, I love your Temperance Hill. Are you going to be tasting it on this show? If not, can you speak to that vineyard? So I'll talk about the show. So I probably should have started with this. Basically, quick intro of who we are, because we have both my fans and your fans here. So for your fans who don't know who I am, my name is Vince. I host a wine television show on Amazon Prime. It's called V is for Vino. And I tell people it's Bourdain meets Alton Brown for wine. So what I do is we go to the wine region. You meet a winemaker. In our Oregon episode, we obviously met Lang and their whole family, Jesse. And then we learn about the grapes that are typically made there, learn about the place. We go to a restaurant and cook dishes that pair with the wines. And that being said, our Oregon episode's already out. So it's on Amazon Prime right now. Or if you don't have Amazon Prime, it's free on visforvino.com to go watch there. And we did the Pinot Gris Reserve and the Pinot Noir Reserve when we tasted, which was really, really awesome, because those, I think, are the two, Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir are the two iconic Oregon grapes. But what this allows us to do, this tasting, is explore some of the other offerings that we weren't able to get to on the show. I can only do so many in the course of the show, and we're doing all these other topics. So this is fun for me because I get to try some of these offerings that we didn't do on the show. And then she also had a part 2 to that question, which is talk about the Temperance Hill vineyard.
Yeah, Temperance Hill. So Vince is too humble. I had a chance to meet Vince. Actually, I met you in LA in your home court. And we met down there, had a glass of, I think it was a Chablis, if I'm not mistaken. And then like 3 or 4 months later, you were back up in Oregon filming your show. So happy to be a part of it. You're too humble. You're a great host and a very conscientious young wine drinker, sommelier. And it's great to have this kind of discourse. So first and foremost, thank you. But to Temperance Hill. Temperance Hill is a really amazing vineyard site. It's south of here in the coast, foothills of the Coast Range, actually an inland little coast mountain range called the Eola Amity AVA. It's on the southern end of that. And our block at Temperance Hill is all 777 clone. It sounds like a World War II landing site. It's called North Guam. But it's a site that's super high elevation. It's all volcanic soils. It's farmed by a gentleman that I hold in very high regard, Di Crisp, as a viticulturalist. We worked with Temperance Hill for a long time, know the vineyard really well. And it's a vineyard site that I think in warm years really, really shines. It's a site that's, like I mentioned, high elevation. Our block's like 800 foot, maybe 850. And it tends to get fully ripe, but it always keeps this core of acidity that runs all the way through it, regardless of vintage. So for me, that kind of freshness and that kind of sense of terroir that comes from Temperance Hill is really captivating and really compelling, because I'm not sure that there's another vineyard in the New World, maybe even here in the Willamette Valley, that has that sort of typicity of terroir. Like you could have a Temperance Hill from Lang Estate, you could have a Temperance Hill from my buddy Mark Vlasic at St. Innocent. And man, you're going to see that vineyard run through the wine. And when you see that happening through all the different winemakers and different cellars and kind of different expressions, I think that's the definition of a vineyard that really stands out on its own terroir and its own merits.
Beautiful. Jesse, I know I'm kind of looking at the Facebook, but just so you know, everyone's being very, very complimentary of all your wines. So you should be very proud. Everybody's being very nice.
Good team. I'll say this to anybody, like, when you have an epiphanous maker, like, it's a glamorous thing to be sometimes. But there's a whole host of people that make those wines happen, from your vineyard team, your cellar team, and your sales team. Everybody across the board is a part of Lang Estate, and I'm just fortunate to be a part of that. Fortunate to be a Lang representative. So it takes many more people than me to make these wines.
Cool. Beautiful. Yeah, no, 100%. I've seen enough wineries to know, no one's a one-man army. I always tell people it's amazing a bottle of wine can get to you for less than $100 with the amount of work that goes into each bottle, Matt is asking me, in your show, and from talking to Jesse, you use a lot of adjectives to describe the wines. Would it benefit me to learn how to dissect the wine like you, or should I just enjoy it? I love this question for a couple reasons. So the first answer is both. You should If you are interested in that, you should get into that. And if you just want to enjoy it, you should just enjoy it. The second part I'll say to that is it's all about practice. You know, people come all the time. I'm sure Jesse sees this. Think, oh, I don't, you know, red wine tastes like red wine, or my palate isn't good. And that's not a thing. It's like anything else you do on the planet. You know, if the first time you went and played baseball, you weren't able to hit and you kept going and eventually you could make contact with the ball, and it's the same thing. The more you see these flavors, if I say something smells like ripe cherries or it smells like bubblegum or whatever I say, it's because I've seen that many, many times. And so I pick it out the more familiar I get with it. And the other thing is that I'm always learning. There's people who can like blind taste me under the table. That's kind of a Sam thing is, you know, they like to go head to head and see who can blind taste better or quicker and get the, you know, figure out what something is without knowing what it is. And there's people who do me under the table. My wife is really, really tremendous at it because women have a better, I think it's science. They can smell and taste better than we can as men. Yeah. So she'll pick out things and be like, oh man, it took me a second, but she got that before I did. So, you know, it's all practice. If you want formal training, that's definitely a way to go. You can go through some of the education. But the number one thing I'll say to help you get more out of your wines is taste them side by side. Because that is how you see differences. It's really hard to pick out the difference between wines if you do one day and then one the following day. So doing things side by side is my number one advice for that. And then number two advice is get so much off the nose and much less off the palate. Most of what you're going to taste, it's the thing where, you know, if you have a cold, you can't taste anything because your nose is stuffed up. Most of the flavors, most of the adjectives are going to come off the nose, and I'm just confirming it on the palate, you know?
Yeah, drink wine and pay attention. Those things don't always go together, but try your best.
Cool. All right. Well, we could probably keep going all day on more questions, but let's go to the next wine, and then we can come back to questions. Cool.
We got the Three Hills, right?
Yeah. So we did the Three Hills Chardonnay to start, and this is the Three Hills Pinot Noir. So same place.
So yeah, this actually, some friends of mine were drinking a wine last night, sent me a picture. They had it with the barbecue, and they said a couple of things about it that I think just jumped out to them that I think are absolutely true. My friends Ashley and Aaron Bell from Domaine Drew in Oregon, our neighbors just over here. Another great winery here in the Dundee Hills and in Burgundy as well. The Three Hills Cuvee Pinot Noir is a blend where we do have more self-imposed rules for the sourcing on this wine. We started crafting this Pinot Noir in 1997. And it's a blend of our Dundee Hills estate, our properties in the Yamhill Carlton AVA, and then Freedom Hill that we've sourced since 1989 in the foothills of the Coast Range down in the new Mount Pisgah AVA. So very different sites, very blue ribbon, good enough for us to be definitely single vineyard wines. We've been making single vineyard wines from them since 1993 or 4, each one. But they're very complementary because they're so different. So the way those kind of that puzzle works together in terms of that overlap of Pinot Noir, it's really good. And we look for wines here in the Three Hills Cuvée that tend to be a little bit denser on the tannin front, definitely more black and blue fruit spectrum wines. And for me, my favorite category within this SKU is the texture. Texturally, just on that kind of category for me, that column might be my favorite Pinot Noir we craft every year. Because for me, that texture is just voluptuous. It's round. It's rich. It's just really nicely textured all the way through the palate. And that kind of gives you a little sense of this particular bottling, something that we look for when we're crafting those wines.
Yeah, I mean, immediately, this is a much more, I don't want to say brooding, but a much darker expression of it. Now, we're also doing the 16, and we just came from the 17. So you think that's more a function of vintage or more a function of place?
It's both. Yeah, and for this wine, the break between the Reserve Pinot Noir and the Three Hills Cuvée, you're going to see that break regardless of vintage. This vintage, compared to the 17, may be like slightly more pronounced. But in general, I think the 16s are really compact. Everything about that vintage was early. You could preface any statement with the comma and just say early, because it was early bud break, it was early bloom, and early harvest. We picked a lot of these. First pick for this vineyard, that block right behind me was picked 2016 on September 1st. And so really condensed. The wine showcased a lot of power, a lot of.
What is typical? If you said September 1st, what's typical?
Yeah, I'd say like second, third week of September-ish. So like September, like 15th to 20th would be like normal. So this was, 2 weeks early for the vast majority of those blocks. And I remember it being very, very compressed. And, we mentioned that nobody does these things on their own. You have a team of people working with you. And man, my crew worked like, 18 hours a day, day after day for like, I think 20 straight days to knock this vintage out. Because for us, it was a matter of picking with vibrancy and not letting things get overripe, which is definitely a concern for this vintage. And I think they showcase that bigger vintage profile, but I think they still have a lot of sensibility and classical Pinot Noir components, which something we really worked hard to make happen.
Yeah, this is still got that persistent acidity, but it's really just coats the mouth, and it's a little richer. It's not huge. It's still fresh. It's still light in body, but it's just really, like you said, dense, I think is a great word for it.
Yeah, it's got that compaction, and it's a wine that's going to age really well. It's funny, like I sometimes you talk about tasting notes. You had a comment earlier about tasting notes. I'm like, geez Louise, God, it's like the most annoying thing to do is try to break down a wine into any, compartmentalization and list off a bunch of descriptors. But this wine for me reminds me of the color purple, for whatever that means. For me, this Three Hills Cuvee is a SKU always reminds me of that color.
Awesome. I'm going to pop in more questions just because we're getting a lot of them, which is awesome.
More fun.
So keep them coming. I hope you have better luck fishing next time. Yeah, so do I. I talked to John. Captain John texted me next day. He got like 2 that day. So and you guys what's funny is you don't see in the episode, for those of you who don't know, in the episode we go fishing for sturgeon. And spoiler alert, we don't catch anything. But what you don't see in the episode is, one, it was like, I don't know, it was at least 8 hours out on the water, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were out there all day, and they were so tremendously confident that we were going to catch something. Because I asked them, I said, it doesn't matter to me, but do you think we're going to get something? They're like, oh, we never not get anything.
Yeah. Well, when you bring Californians on a boat, that's what happens. So, yeah.
Well, the other thing that happened, too, was somebody told me that we had brought a cooler on the boats that we didn't think twice about. And I think it was you who told me that bananas are bad luck on a boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had bananas in our cooler. So that was
yeah, it wasn't our fishing acumen that sold us short. It was the bananas. I think that's key.
So somebody asks, I don't quite understand this question. It's, can you speak to the elevation of your vines? Or somebody says, can you speak to elevation series? Are they, so maybe they're 2 different things.
Yeah, so elevations is one of those, singular components in that algorithm of Pinot Noir expression for sure. That's really critical for your farming, your picking, and your style of wine, no doubt. For us, we actually are pretty captivated by it, which is why we actually bottle. Maybe the question also alluded to our bottling. We do a trio, usually every other year. I bottle a trio off of our estate Dundee Hills properties, where I do one red side, the vineyard behind me, our north block, which is right in front of the tasting room. At like, this is sites at 350, North Block's at like 600-ish. And then our Mia block, Wendy, our proprietor and owner's middle name, my mom, Wendy Mia Lang. So that Mia block's at like 850. So you kind of step up the Dundee Hills, and it's a really fun horizontal. So it's all the same vintage to taste through, because you literally get different profiles that are manifest. We try to keep it pretty simple about the elevation. It's not the only thing showcased in the wine, but I think if you taste them side by side or taste them kind of in a weekly, take a couple notes about them, you'll see some pretty clear breaks about those differences. And it's compelling stuff on the winemaking front. We also do a soil series for the hillside soils in the Willamette Valley that is really captivating. So that kind of stuff is really fun to share with our consumers, because you don't always get a chance to do that, like say with the reserve Pinot Noir. So these are small like 100, 150 case bottlings that are really fine-tuned and very specific, but really fun to show.
Nice. I have a question from Alexandra. How do you recommend drinking Lang wines, with food or without? I'll let you take it after I say definitely with. I mean, you can. They're fine without. Most wines are fine without, but these are begging for food. Just the acidity is so nice that they pair really, really nicely. And they don't get in the way of foods either. They tend to complement a wide variety of cuisine. But you go.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Vince. I mean, I think it's definitely a winemaking philosophy, where you plant your grapes, how you craft your wines. And for us, food is a part of wine. We think of Pinot Noir as food, frankly, and pairing food with different wines is key of the wine drinking experience. And hopefully you have great food and great wine, but together maybe they can attain a level that's better than any one of them on their own. So we definitely make wines with the concept of pairing with food. So I think they're approachable on their own, certainly, but our wines can stand up to a wide variety of different cuisines, like you said. And it's a conscious decision.
Yeah, and something that I'll say too is, like, when I was training in restaurants and taking my exams and things like that, you know, one thing somebody told me was, if you have a good Pinot Noir and a good Chardonnay that's kind of, you know, acid driven and leaner in style, you can pair almost any food on the planet between those two wines. They're just so versatile if they're done properly. So definitely a super versatile wine for food. As far as what foods, so much. I mean, so any red meat would be fine. Like, yes, something that maybe was a little leaner. So I was like Pinot Noir with filet, Cabernet with ribeye, right? Like, you kind of want the fattier cuts for the more tannic, bigger wines. And these are for leaner cuts. But that's not to say that it wouldn't work with any of those other cuts, because the acid helps cut through the food. And then mushrooms, somebody mentioned mushrooms here in the feed. And yeah, mushrooms and Pinot is super classic. Salmon, if you're doing a hearty preparation, like a grilled salmon, is really perfect. In fact, that's what we did on the show. We did a salmon or sturgeon, if we could get one. So yeah, definitely super versatile wine. Cool. Well, I think let's go to the last wine, then we can take some more questions. We got one more to do. So up until now, we've done the Three Hills Chardonnay. We've done the Reserve Pinot Noir. We've done the Three Hills Pinot Noir. And this last one is the Ylang Estate Pinot Noir.
Yeah, so of all 12 to 15 Pinot Noirs we make, the Estate's one we've done for 30 plus years. And it really is, people often ask me, and I think some of the comments kind of maybe suggested this or forecasted it, like what's your favorite Pinot Noir of all the wines that you make? And yeah, I don't really have a favorite. I kind of have food and mood, which dictate what I want to drink every night. But really, for me, the estate wine off the Dundee Hills is the wine I'm most intimate with. It's the wine that maybe confounds me the most. And it's the wine that arguably is our most complex Pinot Noir we craft every year. So in that light, I think it's the most cerebral wine. Not that it lacks structure or sort of like richness, because this vintage especially has got loads of that. But this estate Pinot Noir for me just showcases a lot of this Dundee Hills that we have here. And I'll show you guys. I'm actually in the vineyard, so I can do this pretty easily. But this is little bit of Jory soil. So this is literally the Oregon state soil that is at like a clip of 95% the soil here in the Willamette Valley, Dundee Hills. So this is the soil that the Dundee Hills is known for. And that volcanic soil really, I think, parlays well into this expression of Pinot Noir. For me, it just has this great sort of vibrancy, really dark characters in a vintage like 2016, kind of blue fruit, but then also red fruit characters too. And for me, it might be the most, like I said, complex Pinot Noir we get to craft. And it's the wine that kind of makes me, not all wines do this, but it's the Pinot Noir that makes me kind of just want to like go be by myself and try to figure it out. Because it's a little bit of a Rubik's Cube in terms of its complexity. So it's a real compelling wine in that regard.
Yeah, and so the next question I'm going to get, and I have a little anecdote to that, is, you know, when you're talking about these wines, and you're also getting, you know, you're going up in price, right? You're going up from the Reserve to the single vineyard and then to something like this. And so I think it's helpful to kind of explain, you know, what do people get for that extra money, and what kind of determines that quality level?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. Wine pricing is like, I can't figure it out at all. I mean, I know what we do for our company, obviously, and that's the promise we make, putting our name on the label for every bottle. And it means something to us, but I'm flummoxed all the time by like wine pricing in general. I think a lot of it is ego, frankly. For our portfolio, like we're making smaller amounts, so they get more specific as you go up our price points to our single vineyard wines. And, you know, these are like this wine here is the best 25 barrels we had off the estate. So it's literally, you know, we probably had 275 for this vintage. So like, this is less than 10% of our overall wines. We could bottle under that title. But for us, these are the most evocative barrels and the blocks that showcase the best wines off of our estate properties for the entire vintage. So for our classification, you know, they're the best wines, the most compelling wines. But like, that doesn't mean that somebody's not going to like the reserve better. I mean, you can make a case that the reserve's drinking just as well. But I think it's kind of like specificity and terroir and expression at that point. Maybe ageability too. But yeah, that's a winemaking decision. I've never tasted a barrel and thought, oh, we could make more money by putting it into this wine. You know, our philosophy and our process in the cellar is like, how do you make the best wine from every given block and then select the best wines from every given barrel? It's really that simple, but that's our approach. And yeah, that's an explanation of wine pricing, I guess.
Yeah. And it like you said, it just varies so much winery to winery. I'll tell you without a pricing, from a quality standpoint, what I look for and what I think, you know, you guys do very well is I look for more complexity, and I look for a big thing indicator for quality to me is usually finish. Like, how long after I sip am I still getting new flavors? Am I still involved with it? And so that's something that I think also happens as you start to go up the chain of pricing as well. And then obviously the exclusivity and usually more specific location.
Yeah, I think your comment about finish is spot on. Like, that is, you know, great wines have great finishes. Most wines, people don't even think about past the halfway point, but your comment about finishes, super targeted.
Yeah, that's usually what I look for. We're going to answer more questions, but just because I know we're hitting like 45 minutes, so I just want to give our plugs. So let you know, tell people where they can get these wines, and then I'll just briefly say that if you haven't seen the show, I would love for you to watch it. It's on Amazon Prime. It's called V is for Vino. If you forget that and you search wine on the Amazon Prime television, I'll come right up. You see my face. And if you want to so on my website, I'm able to offer some of the wines that we did in the show, and you can kind of mix and match, which is the good thing about my website is you can get the wines from different episodes, because we do Napa, we do Oregon, we do Santa Barbara, we do Prosecco Italy. But if you want to get some of these smaller, more exclusive offerings that Lang does, most of the ones we tasted today, so specific single vineyard Pinot Noirs or single vineyard, you know, these Chardonnays. I think you have a Rosé. Yeah, those you would get directly from Lang. That's something that you guys could get from his site, which is just lang.com, right?
Yeah, langwinery.com. And if anybody has any questions out there, like we're a craft, small family-owned winery. So if you have any questions, you can email me at Jesse, Jesse, at langwinery.com. It's pretty simple.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I'm always, same thing, always available. If you guys are on Instagram, I know it's a different platform, but I'm super tapping on anything, but I'm always posting new things on Instagram and answering questions and all that. Jesse, what is your philosophy on whole cluster ferment?
Yeah, whole cluster fermentation. Been around a long time as a technique. It's like wine is like fashion. Everything comes back into vogue. Just give it 20 years or so, 25. I think whole clusters definitely experienced a resurgence as a technique for Pinot Noir, maybe more than any other red varietal. For us, we don't employ a lot of whole cluster, although we do, because winemakers never experiment. We only trial things. But we definitely trial with whole cluster pretty regularly, probably a number of different ferments every year. But it's not really manifest in the wines. I have a few colleagues that I really respect that do, I think, a great job with whole cluster. It's not something we employ as kind of a tenant here at the winery. But I keep trying to taste raki and stems, and I don't understand how those flavors would benefit wine outside of maybe structure. So like in terms of the tannin components and structural, maybe extraction into a wine, that might be a good thing for a specific block. But for us in general, we don't employ a lot of it, although I do have some friends that I think do a really good job.
Cool. Frank would ask Vince or Jesse, how long should you hold your different wines? It's funny. I got this in the last webinar I did, and I said, and we kind of spoke to this a little bit, as how much age do you like on your wines? And you ask 10 different winemakers, you'll get 10 different answers. But that being said, it's so much a matter of personal preference. I love when the fruit starts to fade. In fact, I'm cool if there's no fruit. But some people like fruit in their wine. So basically, the trend is the older it gets, the less fruit, the more earth, and the more of those we call tertiary flavors. Dried flowers, and the ground really comes up, and the berry flavors really start to go down. So it's kind of just it's a combination of how you like your wine, but then what varietals age best. Pinot Noir is, I think, a good middle varietal. Like, it can age really well, but it's totally fine young. What allows the wine to age, because I know somebody asked this too, what allows wine to age? It's a combination of tannin, acid, and sugar. And the more you have of those three things, the longer you can go. So that's why Rieslings age, the white wine, you get acid and you get sugar, you can age really long. Cabernet ages really long because it usually has a good amount of acid and it's got a good amount of tannin, usually like through the roof. Pinot Noir is like an in-between because the acid's really high, tannin's like moderate. And so you get, I think we said some of yours will go, 10 plus years, no problem.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, I think balance is the other really important thing for wines that have great ageability. So you have to have a wine that it's kind of that three-legged stool, like Vince just talked about. Balance is really key, because I think wines that don't have balance, they sort of separate, and maybe it exposes more flaws the older a wine gets. So I think it's a real compliment to older wines that hold up really well, is just that sense of balance and that capacity for balance that they were crafted with when they were picked and then cellared and bottled.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Typically the wines that you want to age 10 plus years are the top bottlings of that place. Or if you're in, France or Burgundy, the smaller single vineyard stuff. Those are the things that tend to age better. And they craft them kind of meant to age. So that's definitely a good point. Somebody asked, what is a wine horror story for you? A winemaker horror story? Do you have any off the top of your head?
Oh, yeah. Most of it comes from trucks breaking down, or like a picking crew doesn't show up, or just mostly like logistics. Like I mentioned, we have such a great dedicated team. We can overcome a lot, but if you have a machine break or your membrane on your press, you start to hear that leaky tire sound that's not coming from a leaky tire. That's problematic. So things like that, I think, kind of keep you up at night. But fortitude is your best asset, and experience both, and you just making sure that you're able to dedicate, and your team's dedicated to the wines, can overcome so much. And I think logistical nightmares keep me up at night.
Well, and the reason you say that, for people who don't know, is once you start the clock and once you pick, it's a race against the clock in every step. It's not just, now we've picked, we're good. You have a limited amount of time to do every step of the process. And so if things go wrong, either logistically or labor-wise or anything, you could risk affecting an entire vintage. And so that's why it's so scary. And that's why you hear these stories of winemakers, they're up, 20 hours a day and harvest, and, because they can't allow anything to chance, because that's their whole next year of both, winemaking and revenue and everything. And so it's their whole business.
The stakes are high. And my folks always say, left to her own devices, Mother Nature makes vinegar. And it's so true. So protecting the wines through the whole process is part and parcel. And I think, sometimes I think about wine in picking grapes. It's like, that's the culmination of an entire growing season. So anything you do that compromises that is a real, it's a disservice to the work that went into the growing season.
Alexandra asked, if I can only pick one wine from my last shipment, Rouge Club, to hold back, which one should it be?
Hold back the North Block.
Okay. Which one? So what went out in your last shipment? Because somebody else asked that too. Speak to some of the wines and
We did for our, yeah. Go ahead.
Speak to some of the wines in the most recent shipment was another question.
Yeah, so our wine club is really fun. I team up with our DTC crew and Wendy Lang on that, and Hannah Miller, and we kind of select the wines and forecast out a fair bit. But the recent wine club that we set out for the Rouge crew, at least for all the red wines, it's 100% red wine, 6 bottles. I think we did 2 bottles each of our Elevation series. So 2 bottles off of this vineyard red side, 2 bottles from North Block, 2 bottles from Mia Block. So all 2017 wines, and really compelling wines, part of that Elevation trio I kind of chatted about earlier. And I think that North Block is pretty compact. I think that wine will age. Of the 3, and they'll all age really well, but that one I might try last, even though it's the middle section of the Elevation.
Cool. All right, one question that's probably maybe a good one to end on. What was your turning point in your love of wine for both of you? You want to go first?
My love of wine. I just I was the good fortune of kind of growing up working in vineyards, and my dad just had a propensity for learning about wine, and both my folks are self-taught about wine, and I think for me, watching them, like I say sometimes, they didn't just start a brand, they started a category called Oregon wine, and that's something I'm very proud of, and trying to keep moving that quality bar higher and higher, and in our industry further and further. And I think for me, it wasn't any one thing. It was really just about kind of getting respect for our region, really, is what motivated me. When people said you couldn't grow grapes in the Willamette Valley and you can't grow Pinot Noir here, for me, I never forgot that. And to this day, that still motivates me a little bit to make sure we showcase some of the best Pinot Noir in the world can be grown right here. And that for me is kind of, that's always been the drumbeat.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. My turning point, it was kind of a gradual, it was a very gradual progression. I grew up, my parents owned a restaurant, so I was always around restaurants when I was growing up in downtown Cleveland. But my dad, before I was born, had worked in the wine industry, and we had a little cellar in the basement. And I remember seeing he had a lot of Italian wine, a lot of old Brunellos and Barolos. I remember thinking what could possibly live this long and still be okay to drink? That's always miraculous to me, right? That you could put something in your mouth that's been around for 20 years, 30 years. And so I started, I always had this curiosity for it. And then I spent a year in college abroad, and I was into wine, in the sense that I like to try it, explore it. But I had a Bordeaux in Bordeaux at a family friend's house. They invited us over to dinner, and I am going to find out. I almost don't want to because it'll ruin the magic for me, but I didn't know what the wine was. They found out I was kind of into wine, and so they brought out something from their cellar. And I'm in Bordeaux, so I know if they brought out something good from their cellar, it was something insane that now if you said what it is, I'd be like, oh my God, I drank that. But at the time, I didn't know anything. And so I don't know what that wine was, but it was a red Bordeaux that I had in Bordeaux, in Saint-Emilion, Bordeaux. And it blew away anything I had had previously. And I knew I really wanted to understand more about it. And so when I got out of college and I was still working in restaurants, I started diving into wine, and then that was it.
And when you have great wines, man, it's transformative. And I always say, it was a comment earlier about, do I learn about wine, about how to articulate it? And I thought you did such a great job of answering the question, drink wine, pay attention, but don't be overwhelmed by wine. Wine is for sharing. And if you do that, you've given the greatest compliment to wine. I think one thing you do so great, Vince, is you demystify wine. I love that it humanizes wine instead of is a way to sort of keep people apart or say, oh, you're not good enough for this wine, or you don't understand this wine, or you actually demystify. You're like, come on, let's talk about it. Let's drink it together. And that's something I really appreciate about your style, about your show, and certainly about our collaboration last year.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I very much, that's why I started the show. And I was in some of those situations where I was left out of the loop, and I still am sometimes in those if you're in the wrong crowds. And,
Right.
it shouldn't be like that. It should be, I tell people it should be just as easy as drinking beer or having pizza. And, I think that as my generation grows up, they're embracing that. And so we're going to see that happen over the next decade. You're really going to see it just be very commoditized and a lot like it is in Europe, which is really, as an everyday thing and not just a special occasion meant for people who have, a certain level of knowledge. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for this. Do you have anything else you want to say before we sign off?
For me, God, I feel like I've spoken. But yeah, I just want to say, yeah, I really appreciate everybody tuning in. I really think wine's highest purpose is to bring people together, and I just want to say thank you for sharing wine with us and sharing wines from craft producers, and to Vince and your team for sharing wine from all across the world and bringing great wines to people's to Amazon and in general. I just want to say thanks, and everybody just keep motoring. These are tough times. I'm aware of that. I feel it every day, and I try to keep my blessings, of which there are many, at the top of my perspective every hour, and not every day, every hour. And I think that's really helped me. And it's I think it's the way to approach it. So thank you.
100%. Yeah, I'm a gratitude guy. We are very blessed. Well, cheers and thank you, everybody. I hope we answered as many people as we could. Frank and Catherine and Amy and Scott and Kristen and Lisa and Carrie and everybody who tuned in. If I forgot you, I see you there. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it, man.
Cheers, man. Cheers, y'all. Thank you so much. We'll see you in Oregon when we can.